It's a good thing. So tonight we are in Daniel chapter 4. If you have the notes, that's fine. If you have your Bible, you can go on and turn there. And so if you remember, just by way of kind of remembering what happened, right? You have chapter 1, Daniel and a few, probably close to maybe, we'll say a couple hundred Jews were taken from Jerusalem in the first wave, taken back to Babylon as slaves. But these were the cutest, the brightest, the nice looking, the most masculine. These were the people that if they were going to change the way that the Jews felt about Babylon, these were going to be those young men. So if you remember, King Nebuchadnezzar comes and takes them. He puts them through his kind of 3 years of college. These are young men, somewhere between 13 to 16 years old. And so King Nebuchadnezzar's hope is that if he can kind of brainwash these young men, so that when the rest of the Jews come that are going to be kind of taken from Jerusalem and brought into Babylon, if these young men were Jewish, they were going to be leaders of them, but they were also kind of Babylonian education. If he could kind of get them to kind of be pro-Nebuchadnezzar, then it was a win-win, right? It's okay if there's different groups of people in your kingdom as long as they're all pro-king, right? As long as everybody's for King Nebuchadnezzar. So in chapter 1, we see these young men taken away. Chapter 2, we actually go back a year to the second year of them being in college. You remember, King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and it was about a statue. In Daniel, with God's help, let him know what that statue, what that dream was about. And so all of this elevates Daniel and his friends to a higher kind of view of all the other Jews that have been taken from Jerusalem. Chapter 3, what we read last week, was Daniel was not in it at all, but we see his 3 friends were put into the fiery furnace, and God rescued him out of that with the help of an angel. And through this, we're starting to see now this kind of systematic kind of thought process of King Nebuchadnezzar, where at the very end he sees this happen, and he starts to not praise God, but praise the name and the being of God. Okay, so I am not under the impression that as we read through the book of Daniel that King Nebuchadnezzar gets saved, becomes of faith, and we'll talk a little bit more about that tonight in chapter 4, but he does see things that Yahweh, Israel's God, is above and beyond any other God that he's ever worshipped in all of Babylon, right? So we start to see this. Now tonight, we jump in chapter 4. Now, chapter 4 kind of goes through, and we jump ahead 32 years, okay? So from chapter 3 to chapter 4, there's 32 years in the middle. And so when you read Daniel and you know King Nebuchadnezzar, tonight we're going to kill Nebuchadnezzar off, right? So we see just the very first couple years of King Nebuchadnezzar's reign, and then we're going to see the last kind of word from King Nebuchadnezzar. And then next week, Super Bowl Sunday, we will start with a whole new king of Babylon. So in your timeline, okay, that's why I want to help you understand this. So you kind of have them, you have the Jews, the first wave of Jews come from Israel. Chapter 2, we go back a year. Chapter 3, we kind of proceed in normal fashion. Now, because there's 32 years, almost all of Israel is now in Babylon. Everybody but really the poor, the homeless, are left in the rubble of Jerusalem and Judah. So now, King Nebuchadnezzar is now king of not just a couple hundred of Jews, but now he's king of the known world at that time and has brought all the other Jews, all of other God's people. And so today we get to chapter 4. Chapter 4 is an interesting chapter in the Bible because it is the only chapter in the whole Bible that is written by a pagan. King Nebuchadnezzar himself is writing this. Now, we don't know if he physically wrote the letters of this, but what we can see as we look into this is kind of like a paper, something that King Nebuchadnezzar produces right before he dies, and would have easily been circulated all over Babylon, all over the known kind of region at that time. But with Daniel's help and the Holy Spirit and something that God wanted to know us to have in our Bible, we get chapter 4. So chapter 4 is just an interesting chapter, and it's all about Nebuchadnezzar. It's kind of like a quick memoir of the greatest king to ever exist. It just happens to be his last memoir. And so we'll start there in chapter 4, starting in verse 1. King Nebuchadnezzar, to all peoples, nation, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. It has seemed good to me to show the signs and wonders that the Most High God has done for me. So we can see he's writing to all the peoples, much like he put out the edict when he built the statue in chapter 2. Remember, all the people of all the languages. So we talked about Babylon was kind of like New York City. It would have been, it was the known world. So it would have had a New York City feel. It would have had like a World Trade Center building going on, where all of the countries around would have came, and they would have had dignitaries and embassies there, so that they could have traded, they could have done things. King Nebuchadnezzar, being the king of the known world, would want to keep a hand on that. So he's issuing this out, much like he said everybody had to bow to the golden statue. But he's writing this letter to say, hey, I want to tell you about something that has happened to me. And this will make more sense as we get closer to the end. But he said, I want to tell you about the signs and the wonders of the Most High God. This is not a confession. This is not a conviction. Okay? Remember, Yahweh, the God of Israel, the God of Daniel, is just a God. Okay? Now, that God is showing to be more powerful than Marduk and Mushu and some of the other gods that we mentioned throughout the last couple of weeks. But we have kind of this idea that I want to tell you about this powerful God. Everybody in Babylon would have known about this God. This is the God of Daniel. This is the God of Meshach, Abednego, and Shadrach, right? This is that God. They would have known about the Israel God. Plus, now all of Israel is living in Babylon. They've been enslaved, taken into Babylon. So everybody knows about this God, right? So he says, I want to tell you what I've learned about this Most High God. Verse 3, how great are his signs, how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion endures from generation to generation. Now what's interesting, if you read that, if you read verses 2, 3, and 4, you would think that that's something that we would pray in church, right? You would think that it would be a modern day worship song, right? You could read that and be like, man, those are all truthful things. He is the Most High God. He is great are his signs and his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting. But once again, he is a lost man, right? So the words of a lost man are still words of a lost man. He knows God. He can see God acting, but he doesn't believe in God, right? There's that difference, right? And so verse 4, I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at ease in my house and prospering in my palace. So remember I said this is 32 years later. This is no longer the Nebuchadnezzar who was the warrior who kind of took over the whole Middle East. This is retiring Nebuchadnezzar, right? This is the guy that got his stock portfolio and said, oh, I don't have to go to work anymore. I'm good, right? This is the guy that's looking at Corvettes, all right? This is the guy, this is the king that said, I've gone and I've done all that I can, and now I'm just sitting at home in my lazy boy, just relaxing. This is Nebuchadnezzar in his retirement. But when you see that word prospering in my palace, it's a horticulture term. That we see there in the Hebrew. It means to plant a tree. If you plant a tree and it's doing really well, it takes off after a couple of years, you think, man, that tree's doing well. That's that same term. Nebuchadnezzar, he was doing well. He was doing very well. And while he was sitting in his palace, kind of in retirement, he was still king, but he's definitely in retirement. Verse 5, I saw a dream that made me afraid. Here we go, right? We've already seen one dream, and there was many in between that we don't even have in Daniel. But he's in retirement near the end of his life, and he saw a dream. All right, so you got there in your notes, 32 years. Daniel's now 49. His first dream that Daniel interpreted, he was, 16, 17 now. Years have passed, so we kind of have this, right? I saw a dream, and it made me afraid. What would make a retired king who was the best king that the world has ever seen? He owns more land than anybody's ever owned. His army is the biggest army that anybody's ever known. He is the best king of all. He's in retirement. He's getting old in age. And he had a dream, and it was so much that it made him afraid. It's very, very interesting. And he goes on, as I lay in the bed, the fancies and the visions of my head alarmed me. So I made a decree that all the wise men of Babylon should be brought before me, that they might make known to me the interpretation of my dream. Right? We've seen this. This is chapter 2 all over. I had a dream. I've been worried. I can't sleep. What do? I'm going to call all my people, all the wise men, all the Chaldeans, all the magicians, all of the pharmacists, all of the scribes, all the people that we've seen in those columns of people in chapters 2 and chapters 3. I'm going to call all of them and tell them they must interpret the dream, just like he did in chapter 2. Verse 7, then the magicians, the enchanters, the Chaldeans, and the astrologers came in, and I told them the dream. Notice, this is different than 2. Remember in 2, they had to tell Nebuchadnezzar what the dream was and had to interpret it. Now, King Nebuchadnezzar, he's a little older, maybe a little wiser, so he just says, I'm going to tell you the dream this time. I just need you to tell me what it means, right? So he has all these people come in, and he says, I want you to tell me the dream, but they could not make it known to me. So all the smart people in his kingdom could not make it known to him. Right? Now remember who's in his government, right? Daniel's not included in this list. We're going to see him in just a moment. But all of Daniel's friends, right? So it's not just, Daniel the one Jew. There was plenty other Jews. There's his friend. But remember, in the list of Daniel, God gave him an extra blessing. That was the blessing of dreams and of visions, right? So nobody could interpret this, or nobody wanted to interpret this. Remember in chapter 2, when we talked about the statute, I said that anybody could interpret a dream. Anybody in this room today could interpret a dream. If I told you that I had a dream and a Big Mac was chasing me down the road trying to eat me, and I was serious and we're across the table, and I said, I'll give you $1 million if you can tell me. I've been worried about this forever. For $1 million, could you tell me what a Big Mac chasing me meant? Absolutely, right? Somebody's going to say, it means you should be a vegetarian. Pastor Ed's going to say you need to eat salads more, right? It's going to be whatever you want it to be because you want $1 million. So he calls the smartest people of all of Babylon in, tells them a dream, and says, please interpret it to me. Now, they can say an interpretation, or they can't. Or they don't want to, and so we don't know. We don't know if God blocked their mind where they couldn't say it, or they couldn't even make up one, or if they realized what it was talking about and they just didn't want to bring some bad news, because this dream is a bad news. Every dream that he has is bad news, right? And so he just says, we cannot make it known to me, this interpretation. At last, Daniel came in before me. He who is named Belshazzar, that was his Babylonian name, gave to him after the name of my God. Notice that, my God, right? So Nebuchadnezzar is not saved, right? We still have Marduk, the Babylonian god. That's his God. And in whom is the spirit of the holy gods, and I told him the dream saying. Now, I will say, there's many people, and there's, people say everything, right? There's scholars that say everything. Some people will say that Nebuchadnezzar is saved at this point because of verses 1, 2, and 3. Majority do not. But they will say, just for your Jeopardy moment, so if you ever get caught on Jeopardy and we see there at the very last verse, in verse 8, when he says, in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. At this point, if Nebuchadnezzar was saved, if through all this action he saw this, it doesn't mean he's going to have perfect theology. So some people will say, even though he's speaking about plural theism, where he can have multiple gods, he may have a faith in Yahweh, right, in the God, but he hasn't all figured out, right? A new Christian does not come with a perfect theology. So if you believe Nebuchadnezzar is saved at this point, that's one of your things that you can go to, right? And he said, I told him in his dream. So King Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. Nobody can interpret it, just like chapter 2. And here's what I told Daniel. O Belshazzar, Daniel, chief of the magicians. Right? Remember, magicians are scribes. Remember when we talked about that in chapter 2? Chief of the scribes. Daniel had a leading role. He would have been a chief of the legal kind of authority, helping take care of Babylon. Because I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in you, that no mystery is too difficult for you. Tell me the vision of my dream that I saw and their interpretation. So he says, oh Daniel, tell me the mystery. Now we talked about this word mystery before, and it's basically something that's been told, but you don't understand the divine kind of reasoning behind it. And so we see a lot in Paul's writings, he uses the word mystery, mystery, mystery. And what Paul is referring to when he writes about it is that the Old Testament was talking about Jesus Christ. He was talking about the Messiah, but at that time, you didn't know before Jesus was born that was Jesus. But now you're on this side of the cross and you're looking back, you can see that those prophecies are about Jesus. That mystery of who is the Messiah has now been revealed. And so here Nebuchadnezzar is using that same word, and he says, because you are of God, that no mystery, no divine providence, no divine problem is too difficult for you. Tell me the visions of my dream. The visions of my head as I lay in bed are these. So now he's going to tell Daniel what the dream was, and now we get to see what the dream was. I saw, and behold, a tree in the midst of the earth, and the height was great. The tree grew and became strong, and its top reached to the heaven, and it was valuable to the end of the whole earth. So right, we see a tree, and I gave you there in your notes kind of a bunch of places. You'll see trees are talked about a lot in the Bible. Right, we see there the tree of life, of course, in the garden. Psalms 1 that says that Christians are like trees planted by the stream, roots reaching down to the living water. We see that, let's see, I lost my place. Ezekiel 31 says, Assyria takes the form of a mighty cedar of Lebanon. Just this monster kind of, we would think in our mind, a sequoia, just in the middle of nowhere that was big and strong. Nobody could knock it over. Jesus told many parables talking about different trees. Paul compared Israel to an olive tree, and the Gentiles were a branch that was being added to, that was being grafted in, being grafted into Israel. The cross is a living tree. We see that in 1 Peter chapter 2. And then also Revelation talks many times about the tree of life. And so the tree is a normal thing. Where you kind of like get a vision of a tree. It's kind of normal. Not that they're all visions and they're all dreams, but the thought in what a tree stands for, right? A tree is something that is big, that is rooted, that is formidable. It's something that is great, that can harbor safety, and it's something that can get on your nerves. If you have a big tree in your yard and it drops branches and acorns, pecans all the time, you're just like, ugh, you know? But then yet, when it's pecan time, you're like, ooh, pecan cookies, right? It's a good and it's a bad thing. So you kind of have this idea of this tree. So he had this vision of this tree, but notice its height. Its height goes all the way up to the heaven, right? So he had a vision of a statue, and that statue was really big, it was really tall. Everybody could see it. Now this tree goes all the way up to the heaven, and it grew and became strong, and it reached top of the heaven, and it was visible to the end of the whole earth. So think about a tree that is so big in America, you could be anywhere in America and you could see that tree. Right? That's a big tree. I don't care where you live, that's a big tree, right? And so that's the idea. It doesn't mean necessarily it's reaching to heaven, it just means that you can see it anywhere. Remember when he built the statue? In chapter 2, it was 90 foot tall, middle of gold, on the middle of a plain where the sun's beaming down, which is pretty amazing. And so you kind of have this. So we have this tree that's in the middle. Everybody can see it, but we find more about this tree. Verse 12. Its leaves are beautiful, and its fruit abundant. And in it was food for all. The beasts of the field found shade under it, and the birds of the heavens lived in its branches. And all flesh was fed from it. So we see this tree. It is shelter for everybody. It's food for everybody. It's everything. This one monster tree takes care of the known world. Okay? This is very important. And he said, verse 13, I saw in the visions of my head as I lay in the bed, and behold, a watcher, a holy one, came down from heaven, and proclaimed aloud and said, thus, chop down the tree, and lop off its branches, strip off its leaves, and scatter the fruit. Let the beast flee from under it, and the bird from its branches. But leave the stump of its roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze, amid the tender grass of the field. Okay. So we have this tree, and then all of a sudden we get this word watcher. Okay, that's a King James Version word for Pastor Ed, right? But it's also in others, right? The watcher. If you have ever watched the crazy movie, okay, of Noah, that came out a few years ago, it was Hollywood. I forgot the guy that starred in it. What's his name? You remember? Russell Crowe. Russell Crowe was Noah. And in that was these big rock people. Okay? If you've seen it, they were called watchers. And so when we get this idea of watcher, what is a watcher? Okay? This watcher, what does he do in this? And behold, a watcher comes down, and then he proclaims loud. He's a messenger. Okay? So we see watcher, we would use the word an angel. An angel came down and is providing a message, right? So this messenger comes down. But, for once again, a little side note for your Jeopardy moments, because also, if you are Catholic or your friends go to Catholic, they use this word quite often. The word watcher in the Apocrypha, in the Gospel of Enoch, he uses this word. And he uses this word watcher that we would use during the flood as the Nephiliim, right? So, right before the flood, the angels are kicked out of heaven. The fallen angels come down, and they mate with humans, creating this generation in which God has to wipe completely out with the flood. And so in this, he calls them the watchers. And from that, the watchers in the Gospel of Enoch, which is in part of the Apocrypha, refers to them one time as people made of stone. Okay, which we would imply giants. They're big, they're large, they're humongous. But if you're watching Noah, that's where they get it from. But you kind of have this idea of watchers. So that has nothing to do with this. So it's not a rock person that comes down. It's an angel. Okay, so this angel comes down and he proclaims, chop down the tree, strip it down, cut off the leaves, let all the beasts flee from it, let all the birds scatter. We don't care about anything. But what happens? Leave the stump, right? So they cut this huge monster tree that the whole world can see, cut it down, and take the stump and put this huge iron, this band of iron and bronze around it. And so we can see that this bound refers to bondage, right? The stump that was there, we're not going to get rid of the stump. It's still there. It's just not a mighty tree anymore, but we're going to bind it. But notice what happens here. Let him be wet. All of a sudden, we have this tree, right? We're talking about this tree, this tree, this tree, and then the very next verse, as he's explaining it, let him be wet with the dew of heaven. Right? This tree now goes to a person. So in the dream, who's the tree? The tree is a person. we just we see a tree, but now we get moved to this personal pronoun, right? Let him be wet with the dew of heaven. Let his, once again, pronoun, portion be with the beasts of the grass of the earth. Let his, another pronoun, mind be changed from a man's, and let a beast mind be given to him, personal pronoun, and let 7 periods of time pass over him. Let 7 years. So he's telling this, he's explaining this dream to Daniel. Okay, there's this big tree that's feeding the entire world. And then this watcher, this angel comes down and says, cut it down. And when you cut it down, all the birds flee, all the animals flee, all the people flee, everybody flees from it. But he said, just leave a stump, right? Just leave it where you can see it. But don't let it start growing again. Don't let it start prospering again. You're going to bind this thing with this big metal band so that nothing can grow, nothing can happen to it, nobody can move it. It's there. But also, let him become wild, right? Let him become wet with the dew of heaven. Basically, let him live outside. Let his portion be with the beast. Let his food be like the beast of the field. I don't know about you guys, but I don't see many beasts of the field running through a drive-thru, right? It doesn't really happen, right? So he's going to let him eat grass. Let him eat bugs. Let him be like an animal. Let his mind be changed from a man's to a beast. So a man who has a normal mind, it's got to be changed to an animal type of mind. And let this last for 7 periods, or 7 years. Verse 17, the sentence is by the decree of the watchers. There's that word again, our angels, right? The sentence is the decree of the angels, the decision by the word of the holy ones, to the end that the living may know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will, and sets over the lowliest of men. This dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, saw, and you, O Belshazzar, Daniel, tell me the interpretation, because all of the wise men of my kingdom are not able to make known to me the interpretation. But you are able, for the Spirit of the Holy God is in you. So we can see here that in this, he's had this dream, and he cries out to Daniel, basically, that I need help. And he knows that Daniel can help him. Not only has he helped him once that we know about the Bible, probably many times, but we don't know for sure, at least knows for one, but he knows who Daniel is. He knows his faith. He knows the God that he serves. He's not a believer, but he knows he can help. Verse 19, then Daniel, whose name was Belshazzar, was dismayed for a while. Notice that. You don't even have to be a Bible expert to understand what this dream talks about, right? You just you understand this. But Daniel doesn't just say, well, I know what that means. We've never seen that any time in Daniel, and we'll never see that in the future of Daniel. Every time that there's a dream, it takes him a while. Remember, it takes him a while. He has to walk away. He prays. He asks God's help. And so for a while, he's pondering. He's praying. He's looking this over. And his thoughts alarmed him. Daniel knew what the dream meant. Have you ever had to give bad news to somebody? Well, here we go. And Daniel's got to give bad news. Giving bad news to somebody, that's a bum deal. But when you give bad news to the guy who has promised time and time again that he's going to rip every limb off of you, and then kill and destroy your house and kill every person that lives in it, well, that's a little harder to give bad news to, right? You can imagine. There's a difference, right? So here, Daniel understands. He knows the interpretation. He's prayed about it. He's thought about it. And now he's got to tell the king of the known world he's going to have a bad day, right? He's going to have a bad 7 years, right? So his thoughts alarmed him. And the king answered and said, Belshazzar, let not the dream or the interpretation alarm you. Notice that Daniel knows it. He knows what he should say, but in some way, King Nebuchadnezzar understands and sees that Daniel is having trouble with this. Not that he doesn't understand the interpretation, but he's having trouble delivering. He's like, oh man, you know what happens, right? Your kids come home, they got to tell you bad news. I got an F, I got detention, I got some, it's not just like, hey, Dad's going to tell you some good news. That's a test I studied for. I flunked it, But you know what? Next time, Dad, it's going to be great. Right? Sometimes I wish that could happen, right? But instead, you get the, well, your dad, we studied for that test, and, first period it didn't go. It was just, and then the second period, the bells rung really funny, just threw off my concentration, and, third period I had a sub, and I know, right in fourth period, we had that test, and, the teacher, she was wearing a red dress, and I don't like the color red. It goes on and on and on to eventually tell you, hey, Dad, I flunked that test, right? Your kids turn into your wife sometime, right? They just drag on and on and on. Amen, Laura? On and on and on. These stories that go on forever. You're just like, just tell me, baby, you wrecked the car. I got it, okay? Great, congratulations, right? You kind of have this. And so here, Daniel is there, and he's just like, And King Nebuchadnezzar says, just tell me. I know it's bad. Just tell me. Tell me what it needs to be. And Belshazzar answered, Daniel told him and said, my Lord, notice lowercase, right? So not my God, my Lord, my King. May the dream be for those who hate you, and its interpretation for your enemies. He knows it's bad news, so he's going to suck up a little bit, right? Just like your kids would do, right? It's going to be bad news. Hey, Dad, did I tell you, man, you're looking like you lost a little weight today. Have I told you about fourth period test? Well, my teacher was wearing a red dress, and so it all starts all over again, right? So he's sucking up. He's like, the dream, may it ever be against your enemies. The interpretation, may it be against those who hate you, right? So all these bad things, I hope it's for somebody else. But God told me it's for you, so here we go, right? The tree you saw, which grew and became strong, so that it topped, reached to the heaven, and it was visible to the end of the whole earth, whose leaves were beautiful, and its fruit abundant, and in which was food for all, under which beasts of the field found shade, and in whose branches the birds of the heaven lived. Right, so he's just reciting everything. I've told you guys this from the beginning. Daniel loves lists. He loves reciting. You're going to see this time and time again. So he's just reciting the whole dream, right? You remember that big tree and it did this? It was so great. It was so powerful. Then I love verse 22, right? It's the official ripping off a Band-Aid of your kid. Ready? It is you, O king. It's just like, that's you. Here you go. That's the bad news. You are that tree who have grown and become strong. Your greatness has grown and reaches to heaven, and your dominion to the ends of the earth. Right? Nebuchadnezzar is this tree. He is the biggest and baddest, the most powerful. He supplies jobs to everybody. He supplies food to everybody. Everybody is there because King Nebuchadnezzar was such a great king. The whole world could see King Nebuchadnezzar like that tall tree. Verse 23, and because the king saw a watcher, the angel, a holy one, coming down from heaven and saying, chop down the tree and destroy it, but leave the stump of its roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze, in the tender grass of the field, and let him be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the feast of the field, till 7 periods of time pass over him. Notice he just keeps repeating. This is the interpretation, O king. It is the decree of the Most High which has come upon my Lord the King. And so first thing Daniel says is, this is not from the watcher. This is not from the angel. This is not from indigestion because you had some bad grapes, right? This is from God. The angel, the messenger, is the one who said it, but he was just the messenger. This is from the Lord Most High, which has come upon my Lord the King. Verse 25, that you shall be driven from among men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and you shall be made to eat grass like an ox, and you shall be wet with the dew of heaven, and 7 periods of time shall pass over you, till you know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men, and gives it to whom he will. So he says, it's you. You're going to be driven out like a wild animal. Now, we don't understand this, but in ancient times, if you were mad, if you were wild, you would be pushed outside the city gates, or they would imprison you to zoos. So you're like, oh, Mom, what's that? That's a lion. Oh, Mom, what's that? Zebra. What's that? Oh, that's a crazy man, right? And you just kind of have these wild, rabid, savage guys literally in a zoo. Sean, did they have zoos back then? Absolutely. And so you kind of have this, right? So he's being pushed out. But notice, all this is going to happen for 7 years. But notice, till you know the Most High rules the kingdom. It's going to take him 7 years for him to finally give up and say, okay, God is more powerful than me. Man, what kind of pride is that, right? Usually, hey, just a couple days of this, maybe a bad stock portfolio, maybe I'll lose some business, maybe I have to come out of retirement. But for 7 years, all this is going to happen. And as it was commanded to leave the stump of the roots of the tree, your kingdom shall be confirmed for you from that time, that you will know that heaven rules. When a king has been gone for 7 years, on the 7th year, on the first day of the 7th year that a king is gone, they get to pick a new king. So you can be king of a country or of the world at that point and be gone for 6 years and 355 days. That's a good vacation, people. I'm just telling you, that's a great vacation. You can be gone for all that, and on the first day of the 7th year, it is very common for them to re-elect a king. It would not come from the king's family. They would re-elect a whole new family to the throne. And so here, God says, you're going to be gone for 7 years, and when it's 7 years, you're going to finally know that I am the Lord Most High. But here, God is telling him, you're going to be gone for 7 years, but you'll come back to your kingdom. Right? I didn't take out the whole tree. I left the stump and I bound it. I kept it from growing. But you will be confirmed again. For that time you will know that heaven rules. Therefore, O king, let my counsel be accepted to you. Break off your sins by practicing righteousness, and your iniquities by showing mercy to the oppressed, that there may perhaps be a lengthening of your prosperity. Here, he's not saying that if you are practicing righteousness and if you are showing mercy, then God's just going to forget, right? It's not about what you do. Remember this morning? It's not about the works that you do. It has nothing to do about that. God's will is still going to be done. But it is, Daniel is saying, but if you were to show mercy and you were to be nice, maybe God will be a little easy on you, right? Maybe things will work out. Maybe while you're gone for the 7 years, your kingdom will keep moving forward, even though you're not there. All this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar at the end of his 12 months. He was walking on the roof of his royal palace in Babylon. And the king answered and said, he's talking to himself, right? I love this. Is not this great Babylon, which I have built by my mighty power as a royal residence for the glory of my majesty? And so here, at 12 months, so after the dream, he has a year before he's about to get kicked out for 7, right? And really, on the last day of the 12, he's truly one of us, right? He's walking around, he's looking at his kingdom, he's looking at everything, and says, man, I cannot believe God's going to kick me out tomorrow. I can't believe what's going to happen. What's this going to look like? I have built Babylon with my bare hands. I have taken this over. All this is because of me. I am so good. I am so great. There is no God can do this. And then I love it, verse 31. While the words were still in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven. O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken, the kingdom has departed from you, and you shall be driven from among men, and your dwelling shall be in the beasts of the field, and you shall be made to eat grass like an ox, and 7 periods of time shall pass over you, until you know, right? Until you know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to all of whom he will. Immediately, not a couple hours later, immediately the word was fulfilled against Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven from among men and ate grass like an ox, and his body became wet with the dew of heaven until his hair grew as long as eagle feathers, and his nails were like birds' claws. This is like Guinness World Record, right? Where they're like, right? I mean, it's gross, right? This guy become a complete animal. He's lived out in the field for 7 years, eating grass, completely mine. Can you imagine walking up to Babylon? You're like, oh, Mama, this is Babylon. You talk about this forever. I can't wait to see everything about King Nebuchadnezzar. And then all of a sudden, you see a naked man out there, all hairy. He's like, moo. You're like, Who's that? That's King Nebuchadnezzar. He's lost his mind. He's just, we're waiting for 7 years and maybe something will happen. Can you imagine? He's the new Chick-fil-A sign of Babylon, right? Verse 34, at the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my reason returned to me, and I blessed the Most High, and praised and honored him who lives forever, for his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. 7 years being kicked off his throne, eating grass, living out in the field, hairy like birds' feathers, his nails are all curled over like a talons, and he's out there, in 7 years, he's like, okay, God, I get it. Are you kidding me? Like, literally, one day of eating grass, I'm going to get whatever God's teaching me, right? You're just kind of like, that's why I don't eat salads. And so you're like, I get it, God, I don't want it, all right? I get it. But that's what it is. After 7 years, he does all this. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, and he does according to his will among the hosts of heaven, among the inhabitants of earth. So all this pride that King Nebuchadnezzar had took him 7 years to get rid of it. And after 7 years of living like an animal, he looks up to God and says, okay, God, I get it. You're above me. You're above everybody else in the world. I see. I get it. I understand. 36, at the same time my reason returned to me, for the glory of my kingdom, my majesty and splendor returned to me. My counselors and my lords sought me, and I was established in my kingdom. Notice that. Notice what we just read there, right? So it was this pride. He thought he was better than God. He thought he was better than God. 7 years living like a beast. Okay, God, you're better than me. But look at verse 36 again. At that same time, my reason was returned to me, for the glory of my kingdom and my majesty and my splendor returned to me. My counselors and my lords sought me, and I was established in my kingdom. You think he learned his lesson? No, he didn't learn his lesson at all. And still, more greatness was added to me. Even through all of that, Nebuchadnezzar was restored. God restored his kingdom. He took the bond off of the trunk. Babylon continued to grow. And actually, the kingdom grew bigger than it ever had been. But now I, verse 37, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol the honor the King of heaven. For all of his works are right, and all of his ways are just, and those who walk in pride, he is able to humble. So when you read that, you're like, wow, man, Nebuchadnezzar, it was like his salvation experience. No, it wasn't at all. And we'll see a little bit later why it wasn't. But you see this, and through all of this, through all that God did, wanting to humble himself, 7 years, exactly what God promised. He released him from his mental craziness, and he got a shave, and he got a nail trim, and he came back, and he was like, man, look at my kingdom, look at my greatness, look at my splendor. So if you're keeping up on the flow chart that we did, right, the little bubbles, you have the bubbles right here. Number 4, Nebuchadnezzar's dream. The 3 things I want you to walk away this evening is a king's pride. He asked for forgiveness, and he was restored. Now, it wasn't perfect. He wasn't perfect asking for forgiveness, but he did humble himself, say he was God, and he was restored.